Drew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. All right. So, for our audience, for the uninitiated, for those who wouldn't know, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Drew Vaughn. I'm a photographer. I'm an aviation professional, husband, and at the current time, I am the director of sales and marketing for Panasonic Avionics, and I've got the privilege of leading a team, and we work on aftermarket sales um, uh, support for airline customers.
Okay, cool. All right. I want to get into all that. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up actually here in Orange County. I was born in Newport Beach, grew up in Irvine, and then in my teens, early 20s, I lived in the Bay Area. And then I kind of went on a world tour with my current company, and I ended up right back where I started. So now I live in Tustin.
Okay, cool. So, when you were a kid, when you were young, what did you think you were going to do when you grew up?
Well, if you read the book that I authored in second grade entitled All About Me, I wanted to be a garbage man. And it was actually quite funny, when I had to present my book to all the kids in school, everyone laughed at me. And the teacher got furious because it happened to be that her boyfriend at the time was a garbage man and in waste management. And she made everyone know that he made a lot of money and he had a great job.
And it is a great job, and
Absolutely.
It's a great profession, totally noble. And I love in grade 2, you're already starting shit with people. You were creating beef in the classroom.
Exactly. Yeah, I was disrupting, the paradigm of what everyone thought a successful future was.
Good for you, man. Already doing it. So,
yeah.
But early age, what were you drawn to? Where did you think you were going to go when you first started actually thinking about a career?
I was in a position like I think a lot of others where as you're getting towards the end of high school and you start really having to, you're forced to be in that position of trying to define a path for the rest of your life. I mean, I really struggled to understand what that was. I mean, I wasn't very interested in school. I had various interests, but ultimately I felt like I wanted to do something where my strengths could be, I think really used for the benefit of myself and others. And so towards the end of high school, I mean, I really thought, well, I also want to try and do something that I want to do, something that I'm good at. And I was like, well, I'm good at cooking, and I enjoyed cooking at the time. And I was really good at fixing things and, solving problems. But I never really had any formal training for, how to actually fix things. I just had, I guess you could say, a natural knack for it. So, I kind of got to a crossroads where, I was about 18. I was living with my mom. She had decided that she was going to move back to Mississippi. This was a couple years after my parents had split up, and she just couldn't afford to live in California anymore. And I was really kind of forced to make a decision at that point. And, I kind of made the decision by saying to myself, well, I already know how to cook. That's a life skill I already have, but I don't formally know how to really fix anything, solve some problems. And so, I was watching daytime TV, saw a infomercial for an airline maintenance school, and took a tour and decided to move forward. So, I think it really just happened as quick and natural as that. So,
and dude, what a cool story. You're just I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. TV, give me the answer.
Well, yeah. I think there was also an element too that, my grandfather served in World War II and he was an aircraft mechanic. And as a kid, my dad had kind of gifted me all of his pictures, his medals, and I don't know, maybe there was a sense of an early attachment to kind of the heroism that he had. And I think also just kind of the wonder that aviation has that kind of stuck with me, and, I guess I kind of settled with the idea as well that, well, even if this doesn't work out as my career path, at least I have a skill that A, I can use in my own personal life, or B, I can always fall back on at a later time in life. So
you get into being an aviation mechanic, and you went to school and then you entered into the industry. So when you were in the industry, because there's a whole other part we're leaving out, you also grew up playing in punk bands.
Totally. Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
So before we get into the industry, aviation industry, let's hit on that for a little bit. So how did you find punk and hardcore?
well, I guess the earliest introduction that I really had was actually through heavy metal. And this happened in the late 80s. My brother had gotten exposed to bands like Metallica, Megadeth, Sepultura, and our parents were very, very against it. And he would sneak CDs home and tapes, and it was kind of like a guilty pleasure to go and listen to that type of music. And through that, got exposed to Danzig, the Misfits, the Ramones, and the time I was about maybe 14, 15, got into high school. Rancid was huge in the Bay Area. Green Day was really big. And I think that's where I started to transition more into punk versus metal. And, I was very privileged to meet a lot of friends, as I was getting out of high school that kind of guided me in the right direction towards hardcore from, say, the punk and the metal music I was listening to. And, just finding the creative outlet, at Gilman Street every weekend, and, kind of creating this very unique social life that I had never really had before. It was super exciting. And so that's kind of how I came about finding it.
What was the band that made it for you, not just something you listened to, but something that you were a part of?
I'd say the earliest memory I have that I had stumbled onto something huge was the first time I saw American Nightmare. It was at iMusicCast in Oakland. Let's see, My Chemical Romance was the opening band, believe it or not. And it was a fairly tame show, something I was used to. And as soon as they came on, I was standing back by the merch table. Some dude used my shoulders as a springboard to launch and headwalk into the crowd. And it was the most insane thing I'd ever seen. And there was so much energy in the room. That's when I knew that hardcore was just something different that I had ever experienced before. And from that point on, got to meet people, got exposed to other bands, Champion being one of them in the early 2000s. And I was exposed to all the record labels, and that's how I ended up there.
So what about playing in bands?
Playing in bands, I had started playing drums when I was about 16. My brother was, he was really into guitar. He had a best friend that was extremely talented. He would, we'd go on the weekends to Guitar Center and he would play Eruption and have an entire crowd around him. And he was classically trained on the violin. And so I kind of became that supporting member to jam with them in the garage. Through some of my friends, we had, kind of formed just some garage punk bands, never really went anywhere. Got into a metal band that started actually playing shows. And, there was probably a good 4 or 5 years when I first got into hardcore that I didn't really know people well enough to be able to actually form a band. And through kind of a series of breakups, of other bands that my friends were in, it was just kind of being in the right place at the right time to come together. And we formed the band Skin Like Iron.
Oh yeah. I don't believe you weren't in this iteration, ended up putting out a record on my record label.
Mm-hmm.
But you weren't in that iteration, right?
No, I had left before that time.
Yeah.
So, that was an interesting crossroads for me where right around the time that record came out, I had made kind of the decision to move on with some life choices and some career choices, and had to kind of, really make a decision on putting a majority of my effort into really my career versus, say, some of my own personal interests. So,
all right, let's take a step back, man. So the reason I want to tuck into the punk thing is like anyone who's listened to this podcast, I always kind of laugh about it. And myself, I'm kind of laughing at myself the most. Is like growing up punk and hardcore makes you like a professional critic of all things.
Oh, totally.
They're like the most critical people, like in a good way, because you notice all the cracks and things, but also a super obnoxious way where it's like you've got a lot of opinions on things.
Yeah.
And you often feel like your opinion has to be heard because you grew up in a punk scene telling you that. There's not a right or wrong with it. I just always think it's funny when we talk about leadership, and especially people who came from punk and hardcore who are now in leadership. Because I want to know, like, from your perspective, because you got into your what would go on to become your professional career at a fairly young age. So, like, at what age did you take your first professional job as a mechanic?
So let me see here. I actually got my first job in aviation in 2004. At the time, kind of post 9/11, maintenance jobs were still relatively hard to come by for folks that were straight out of school, because there was still such a huge market of mechanics that had gotten laid off. And so I started in a parts room. I was handing out parts to mechanics and doing inventory. And it was about 2005 that they had discovered that I had my license, and they actually pulled me out to become a full-time mechanic. So 2005, I started in maintenance, and I was with that company for about 3.5 years as a mechanic. So yeah, I'd say 2005 is when I really kind of entered into, I think, the world that I'm in now in airline maintenance and technical operations.
So like from a punk's perspective, and like those early, like when you started sorry, was it like the tool shop, did you say?
Yeah, it was like a tool shed and a part shed. Yeah.
A tool and part shed, and then eventually going into becoming a mechanic. What were some of the formative moments for you where you first started having like bosses basically, and you were learning about leadership? Either like, oh, hey, that's what good leadership looks like, or like, oh, that's what terrible leadership looks like.
I don't think I had a lot of that in my first job because, I would say that there's a very clear division between management and leadership. And I think in my first probably 5 years as a mechanic, I was being very managed. I didn't really have, I think, a mentor who was a leader to me. And so I don't think it was until really probably 2009 that I think I really felt like I was being led rather than managed. And, for me, I think that the difference was rather than being driven to complete tasks, it was more, I'd say I was presented with more challenges around creating solutions and seeing the bigger picture.
You did take something though from your early experiences because you identified the difference between like management and leadership. And
yeah.
I'm a firm believer in there being a difference. Would you mind if I shared it?
Absolutely.
If you're managing people, you're just managing their workflow. If you're leading people, you're responsible for their development.
100%.
And like leading people can be like managing like there is a part of that, and like directing and any of those things, but it involves like coaching. It involves giving people stretch assignments. It involves like giving people like the spotlight at the right time so they can kind of see what that's like. It involves opening up avenues for people that might scare them and they might retreat from it. And then you encourage them to go forward, or they retreat from it and you say, hey, that's okay. Let's go somewhere else. Or you give them an avenue and they're like, that's it. That's the thing. Being a leader is about being with people. Being a manager is about directing people.
One of I think the key differences that I see there as well is when you're a manager, or if you're being managed as an employee, you are a piece of human collateral. Yeah. You were there to complete a task and that's it. In 2019, I was able to join a Panasonic Leadership Summit, and our keynote was done by Bob Chapman, who's the CEO of Barry Weimiller. And he does a lot of speaking about a concept of truly human leadership. And the way he defines leadership, at least as part of that conversation, is that leadership is really the stewardship of the people that you're entrusted to lead. And, I think when you make that switch to, really taking responsibility for the livelihood and the career of the people that work for you and work with you versus purely outcome-based leadership of just trying to achieve a certain goal. The rewards, both personally and for the folks that you have the privilege to lead, is exponentially more significant. I find that where I've been successful in leadership, and it took me a long time to realize this, was, I always felt that a good leader was one that was able to convince others to want to work for them or work with them rather than forcing them to do so, right? And now I found that, some of my successes in being able to achieve that was not necessarily convincing others that they could complete a task or they could achieve an outcome, but more so that their individual and unique contributions were critical to the success of a certain project. And that at the end of the day, their livelihood and their happiness was the number one outcome that I was looking to achieve.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I'm going to share a philosophy I have with you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, there's this like whole thing about retention right now, like whatever people want to call it, the great resignation or whatever it is. And I'm not saying it's not real, because I know people are leaving jobs and for all sorts of reasons. One of the ways that I encourage people to look at attracting and retaining people is, I believe that people look at things from a scale of 4 things, and starting with the most important, the least important. And those are the things that are indicators of someone staying at a job. The number one indicator, in my belief, of someone wanting to stay in a job is their relationship with their boss.
100%.
But I don't mean, do they think their boss is awesome, like a cool person? Do they like them? Is the boss funny? In fact, I know a lot of people who are like, actually, I like my boss a lot, but man, they suck. They're a terrible boss.
Yeah.
So it's not about your boss being cool, funny, like someone you can chop it up with. More so, it's someone who is invested in you.
Yeah.
And again, you don't have to like them. You might find them a little intimidating, or maybe they're a bit abrupt, but they're invested in your development, give you great opportunities. You learn things from them. You stretch. They inspire different kinds of thinking. They give you the opportunity to inspire different thinking in them.
Yeah.
Like that investment, people will stay in jobs forever if they have a great boss.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two is the people you work with. But again, not like, are they cool people? And, I don't want to say the idea of company culture isn't a good thing, because I think it's a super good thing. But I'm not even talking about company culture. What I'm talking about is, do the people you work with enable you to do your best work? Is the connection that you have with them is like the sum is truly greater than each of the individual parts. Like, do you have that kind of connection where you stretch each other, challenge each other, take each other to new heights, do your best work together? If you're part of that, you're reticent to leave a company.
Yeah.
The third thing is, do you like your work? And I know that sounds super wild that it'd be that far down on the list, but like in North America, we've got this idea that like everything should be perfect. Like, you should have a great boss, a great team. You should love your work. You should get paid well. That's like dream job. Very few people have that.
I totally agree.
You can actually have a job that maybe you don't actually like the thing that you do, but if you have a very cool boss, like a boss that really invests in you, and you've got a great team that enables you to do your best work, what you do is actually less important. And the last thing that I think people care about is how much they get paid in their benefits, and also including their work-life balance. It's like, it's the thing people talk about the most.
Yeah.
Because it's the easiest to talk about. But I think it's the last indicator of attracting people and keeping people in the company.
Yeah. One of the things that I kind of learned from one of my mentors is every person has their own sense of professional currency. What is important to them? for some people, that may be, as you said, money, work-life flexibility, things along those lines. But I think most people, that is not their primary currency. I think that, people are eager to be a part of a team, have a sense of value within an organization, and also have an outlet where they're able to grow, I think, professionally and as a person. I mean, and that's not to say that they're just looking to move up the ladder, but they're looking for opportunities to expand, their skill sets, expand their experience, gain a lot more maturity in the skills that they already have today. And by facilitating that and by offering that to the team that you have, I think that you'll find a lot more fulfillment that can overshadow things like you've said, money, flexibility, vacation time, things like that. So,
well, and I love what you just said there. That I like the term professional currency because I don't know if you ever heard and I don't know if they still had it, but Netflix had a kind of take whatever vacation you want policy.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time hearing it and being like, whoa. But also we have a policy like that in our company. And it's not the policy that matters. It's that we actually have to kind of force people to take vacation because they're actually super into their job.
Yeah.
And they like what they do. And maybe they don't like what they do, but you like what you do, right, Spencer?
Yes.
Whew. Okay.
Good. All right.
But they like who they do it with. They like being part of the company, that we have to remind people hey, you need to take vacation. Having a policy like vacation or how much money you make. Yeah, that's cool. Those are all nice things, but it's not what people care about, or few people. I like that idea of professional currency. It's a good one. So if we think about, and sorry, you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say, I mean, what that also does though is, aside from giving people time with their families and time away, that also offers a sense of security, right? And that's an intangible, benefit that you can't measure with money and things along those lines. So
totally, 100%, man. All right, so you get into being a mechanic, and then what happens next in your career?
So, I mean, really, as an aircraft mechanic, your paths for growth are becoming a lead mechanic. I did that. You start to work on more sophisticated or larger equipment. I went from working at a cargo company to working on private jets. And as you kind of go up those levels, the stakes get a little bit higher. The standards of your work, also the demands get a little bit higher. But beyond that, I mean, really your paths for growth are in just management of operations. In commercial aviation, there I think are a lot of more diverse paths that you can go. When I started my current company, I was just an aircraft mechanic. And after I had demonstrated a pretty high level of competency in a very short period of time on their systems, I was kind of adopted into their field engineering program. And, the way I kind of looked at it is I was not a computer nerd. I was not an engineer by trade whatsoever, but I understood systems. I understood problem solving. And, after a lot of weekends and nights, looking at YouTube videos on how to work Excel formulas and, learn Linux, I mean, I was able to fill the gaps of, the experience and the knowledge set that I didn't have to be a valuable contributor to that group. Mm-hmm. And so kind of tying back to the whole punk scene, mm-hmm. I think one of the skills that I learned that's probably one of the most valuable skills that I've brought into my career is adaptability. Mm-hmm. And I think that, when you're in a band, when you're on tour, you get thrown challenges all the time. And, one of the things that I think that one of the uncomfortable situations that forces you into is the consequences that you're going to face in the immediate term. If my van breaks down, I'm not going to make it to the show. The entire tour, as a project plan, if you will, is going to slide to the right, And so I think that adaptability and being forced into uncomfortable situations kind of gave me, I think, the drive that I needed to identify the gaps potentially in my career and work to fill them on my own in the absence of a formal education.
Well, and man, I love what you're saying. So, friend of the show, Dan Smith, captured tattoo, and you're wearing the merch there. We were talking about your episode, and he's like, actually, I think one of the coolest parts of Drew's story is how he literally worked his way up, but also kind of took charge of his own development in a lot of ways. And it's similar, I guess, if you think of maybe like a tattoo artist. It's like there's not like a tattoo artist school that you're going to. You've got to like hone your craft and be responsible for it. So I think that's part of why he finds your story so interesting. But at what point did it go from you kind of identifying your own gaps? And I love the punk analogy, by the way, because I think that's dead on. Where did it go from identifying your own gaps and addressing them to the company going, actually, no, we're going to start investing in you?
I think that when I first made that jump into our engineering group and I started to identify the gaps that I had, at that point in time, I was troubled with a lot of self-doubt. I felt like I was in over my head. I was in a position that I was not qualified to be in. And I had accepted a role that I was 100% going to fail in. And, at that point, I mentioned it earlier, this is where I kind of transitioned from, being in a band and managing a career to, a point where I had this opportunity and I really, saw this is, really a point where I need to invest in this career as my livelihood. I saw that there was opportunities beyond just being an aircraft mechanic. And that's where I feel like I really just was 100% invested to really trying to develop myself to be successful in the role, because I kept telling myself there's no way that I was going to be successful. And, after probably the first year or so, when I started to really truly see that not only was I meeting some of the expectations, but actually exceeding them. And as I started to see that I was really, or that my leaders were really giving me the confidence to be involved in more executive level and higher level decision making, I think that's where I really decided to kind of go all in and understand that, it wasn't just kind of my efforts at that point, that I'm trying to think of a way to explain it, but it wasn't necessarily just my own efforts that were taking over. I started to see that my mentors at the time were actually leading me down a path, even though at that time I couldn't see that they were kind of clearing the path for me. And I think that came through them constantly giving me bigger challenges every single time, and even though I was still fueled by kind of self-doubt and low confidence, every single time that I was able to meet a challenge or accomplish a goal, and there was a bigger one on the horizon, that's when I started to realize that, in a way, my potential was a lot wider than I had ever thought.
Yeah, and man, and that's such a cool thing. Like, so it sounds like at one point you were like, okay, I'm doing all this pushing, and only to realize, well, actually, I'm kind of getting pulled as well.
Exactly.
And there's that like middle point where like maybe my effort and their effort are actually, we're in sync now. They're pulling and I'm pushing. We don't always get the chance of having people being invested in us like that, though. So it sounds like you were just in like a super cool situation.
Yeah, I think that, I was very lucky to have the opportunities to work with some of the people that I'm still very happy that I have the opportunity to work with them today.
Yeah.
And I think it was really timing, both in my personal life and having the ability to focus on, I think my future and my career, and also taking advantage of the wealth of, I think, opportunity that other people were feeding me, at the time. So,
Um, that idea though of like pushing through self-doubt. So people are always surprised. Well, not always. People can be surprised when I tell them that I live with a huge, huge amount of self-doubt and a lack of confidence. But for me, it's never a confidence in whether or not I can do something. I never doubt that. Could I go and write a record on the level of a Walter Schreifels? Probably not. And like I'm pretty confident I can't do that. And I guess maybe I'm just good at kind of like scoping in what I can and can't do. Like,
yeah,
I don't think I could do that. Could I go, like we just talked about Dan, could I go give a tattoo or learn how to tattoo at that level? Absolutely not. I've got no ability to do it. But the things that I think are relatively within my realm of possibility, I'm totally confident I can do it. Even if they're like big level, like, could you do that? Like, yeah. I'm absolutely completely positive I could do it.
yeah,
Where I struggle and where I have confidence is about, am I doing the right thing by people? Am I having the right kind of relationships with people? And both personally and professionally, like I struggle with quite a bit of I guess maybe I could lightly say like social anxiety,
yeah,
but most people wouldn't know that about me because I always seem at ease when I'm around people.
yeah.
But in reality, I'm like doing a lot of work to be present in the conversation. So I know on my end what it means to like work through self-doubt. When it's outcome focused, no problem. I know I can
Yeah.
crush that. But if it's like, am I a good leader? Am I a good friend? Am I a good partner? Like that's where I feel a lot of self-doubt. Where do you feel self-doubt?
There's a period of time where I feel like I relate to you on all of those levels. I mean, throughout my life, I've never been the best at anything. I feel like there's a lot of times where I'm not even good at a lot of things. But I think for me, I've used self-doubt as a fuel in a way to continually push, the boundaries of what I think I can accomplish, the quality of my work, and also I think just the awareness of how I carry myself with others. And I really feel like in the last several years, as I've started to see maybe some of the positive consequences of my leadership style rub off on others, and not even just you know um, team members that report directly to me, but others that I interact with. I think finally coming to a self-realization that self-doubt that has shaped how I work with others and seeing the results of how that has positively influenced others has maybe allowed me to manage the self-doubt a little bit more. It's turned what I've taken as, you know, I use that self-doubt as a fuel to accomplish an outcome or a task to, almost in a way, an obligation that I need to carry on with the same level or higher than where I'm performing today, not necessarily for my own career path anymore, but I think really more so for the benefit of others that I work with. I mean, one of the big challenges that especially that we've faced in the aerospace industry and in aviation has been, the recent pandemic. And, it's been a very, very difficult time where, we've had to make humongous reductions to, at the airlines, all of the suppliers, the OEMs. People have been working themselves to the bones for 2 years now. And, there have definitely been times where I've wanted to succumb to just fatigue, self-doubt that I am the right person and I have the capabilities to contribute to my company to overcome, the issues that we're facing. But I think more so now I look at it as, you know, I have to put that self-doubt aside and I have to manage that because other people are depending on me to lead them through this difficult time. And other people are depending on me to let them know that it's okay to feel overwhelmed and it's that we are going through a challenging time, but at the end of the day, working together, we'll all get through it. So,
Oh yeah. I want to come back to that because I want to pop back into something and then I want to come back to that. I want to talk about the concept of emotional labor. Are you familiar with that?
loosely.
Okay, so we'll pop back on that. I want to talk about working through self doubt, and I found it fascinating because you said it kind of fueled me. Was that intentional? Were you like, whew, I acknowledge I feel this way, and I'm gonna like use that to push me, or was it just like you just realized in retrospect it fueled you? Was it intentional, do you realize that in retrospect?
I think that there was a period of time where it was 100% intentional.
Nice. So how did you do that though? How did you harness it like that? Because that to me is like a fascinating idea.
For me, I mean, looking back at it now, and I think I was very aware of it at the time, but, you know, um, as I was growing within my company, as I started to see more opportunities on the horizon, both for my own personal, professional growth, I was also at a period in my personal life where uh, my my now wife had just moved down to Atlanta with me because I was living there at the time, and actually my company had moved her down with me because they wanted me to fill this role. And that was the only way that I said I was ever going to move is if they moved my wife. And I felt a certain sense of responsibility at that time that it was no longer just about me. The career path that I was going and the personal growth that I was pursuing was now supporting a family with me and my wife. And, around that same time, my mother had passed away. I lived very far away from the rest of my family. I had just moved my wife away from her family. And so there was a tremendous sense of responsibility that came that, I can't screw this up. This is an opportunity that if I harness, not only am I benefiting my life now and my future, but I have to think about my family now. And I think that having that, I guess, the tremendous weight being put on my shoulders at that time, that is where that's really why I took that self-doubt and used that as fuel to, I guess, continue to grow. Because at that point, it was no longer, it wasn't a choice anymore.
Yeah.
It was an obligation. I had a family now. And I grew up in a very traditional American home where, my dad, would teach us very strict manners. We had to hold the door open for my mom everywhere that we went. We had very strict table manners. And, I think even though I had observed that throughout my life, that sense of responsibility had never truly hit me until that point. And so that's where I kind of realized that self-doubt, again, I could use that as a fuel and I had to, so.
Can I give you a concept to like a framework to put into that?
Sure.
So when I look at motivation, and this is like really like a basic way of looking at motivation, and then of course, like the more you get to know someone or someone gets to know themselves, you can get more complex from here. But if we think of it from a very basic way, people can motivate them in what I call avoidance-based motivation or achievement-based motivation. And kind of traditionally, I call it like negative motivators or positive motivators. Yeah. But I've been moving away from using negative or positive because people are like, I don't want to be negatively motivated. It doesn't mean you're evil, like you're a terrible person. It's just ways of thinking. Yeah. So avoidance-based motivation would be, let's say, and I'll just use self-confidence as an example. So if you're self-confident, you got some self-doubt in it. Avoidance-based thinking or negative motivation would be, I don't I don't think I'm good enough for this.
Yeah.
I don't think I can hit the mark. I think I'm like over my head, maybe I'm not smart enough, fast enough. Maybe I don't have the grit for it. I want to avoid failing. So the avoidance is about, you use that feeling, that self-doubt, to fuel your energy into not failing.
Yeah.
But you're avoiding something.
Yeah.
Achievement-based thinking, or what I call positive motivators, are people that would run a race not to win the race necessarily, but just to beat their last time. Yeah. Or to have a really good time. They're not trying to avoid something. They're trying to achieve something, but that achievement doesn't have to be some super huge thing. So again, let's say if it was someone lacking a little bit of self-confidence, they'd be like, hey, I want to prove to myself I can do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so you could have two people, both like a lack of self-confidence. One's like, I want to avoid failing. Someone else is like, I want to prove to myself that I could do it. There's not a right or wrong, and people can have different elements of that in different parts of their lives. You can transition to different kinds of thinking in different ways. But if you were thinking at that time in your career, were you more negatively motivated, like avoidance, like I want to avoid failing and letting everyone down? Or were you more achievement, positive based, being like, I want to prove this to myself?
I'd say 100% it was avoidance. Very early on in my career, I remember very vividly, I had worked on an aircraft that had a very complex issue. It was well beyond a remedial task that I was used to doing. And I fixed the issue. The aircraft flew out and it came back in. And I remember watching the airplane land, and I felt a great sense of accomplishment at that time, right? I'd fixed a problem. I felt a sense that, in a way I'd almost saved a life, because it was a huge safety issue. And my supervisor at the time, said, forget about it. There's no glory in aviation, and really the reason why he said that was, it's a 24/7 operation that never ends. If you overcome, either a challenge or you achieve a major accomplishment, there's always something the next day. There's always going to be another problem on the horizon. And, a lot of what I do today is not necessarily about achieving a massive goal. It is about reducing and mitigating risk. Mm-hmm. And so sadly, I am more prone to, be in that negative space of avoidance rather than, achieving, achievement. There have been times, I'd say few occasions where I've worked very complex projects with teams where we had a very clear goal in mind. And I think, at the end of those projects, definitely there was a great sense of achievement that we were able to accomplish. But sadly, I think just based on the nature of my work, it's more avoidance based.
Well, and when you say sadly, I want to push on this because it's not a good or a bad thing. The reason I break it down is because it can have bad elements, because people who live with more avoidance based thinking can have like a higher level of self-doubt, anxiety, depression. But they can also be like really unbelievable at finding the issue.
Yeah.
Because they want to avoid failing, or they want to avoid letting people down, or avoid catastrophe for what it is. So they're like hyper focused on the details. Flip it. People who are more positively motivated typically have a little bit more joy in what they do. They're maybe a little bit more easygoing. They're less reticent to take a risk. They'll take a leap. They'll go do this thing because they've got that confidence. But a piece is that they can easily overestimate their own ability or skills.
Yeah.
They aren't always very detail oriented, so they could just be like, it's fine.
Yeah.
And they can be a little less, they tend to not be as high in empathy. So they don't have a great read around. So, because someone who's avoidance based is like really good at reading people.
Yeah.
Someone who's more positive based just assumes everyone's going to go along with them, and they can be a little less, thoughtful to the impact of what happens to people around them.
Yeah.
There's not a right or wrong. It's totally a thing. Myself, primarily, I'm like avoidance based motivator, but not in all areas. So like in how we build the company, I'm very avoidance based. Like I don't want to fail. I don't want anyone who's taken a risk in their career to come with me to not have a job. I don't want us to go out of business. I don't want someone to come in and feel they didn't have a good experience or didn't learn or didn't grow. So it's all like, I don't want to be like that. And it fuels what we can be. But if I think about things like athletics, like I'm trying to coax you into doing this triathlon with me. I don't care about, if I couldn't finish a triathlon, I would feel 0% bad about it. So it's not about avoiding failing. I just want to beat my last good time.
Yeah.
Or I want to do as good as before, or based on the fact that I'm a bit out of shape right now, I just want to complete it.
Yeah.
But mostly I just want to have fun with my friends. I want to go with two guys that I've gotten to know a bit over the years, like invest in our friendship, have some fun. Like I just want to have a good memory.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no avoidance based there. It's all achievement based. I want to achieve something fun for everyone. And it can be different in different places in your life. I know the one where I feel like I'm going to let people down is where I get avoidance based, and it's not bad at all. In fact, being an avoidance based thinker has made me ultra sharp.
Yeah.
And able to do things in a way that I think is very, very, very precise. But now let's hop forward. Let's talk about leading people through this time that's been really difficult for your industry. What kind of wear and tear has that had on you from a leadership perspective?
Well, I think that the wear and tear on me specifically, and what I think myself and other leaders have experienced, is the fact that with the tremendous amount of uncertainty, people tend to kind of go down very dark paths in their mind, right? I mean, about their own outlook in their career, about the longevity of our industry and their own position in the company. And, the daily stress of having to work 10 times harder than you ever had to work before. Over time, it becomes just extremely challenging to keep your motivation and, a positive outlook after so long. I mean, in the early onset of the pandemic, I had to motivate my team out of kind of necessity that, we were pretty much working all morning, all day, and all night to really mitigate risks and carve out a future where we could survive, not even be successful, just survive. Yeah. And as the industry started to recover, and we were now being presented with the great opportunities of new business, managing that along with, 2 years of fatigue and frustration and, emotions of having to lose people and, potentially all the stresses in your own personal life with the pandemic and the impact that that's caused to your family. I found that it's been incredibly challenging, even for myself. Mm-hmm. And I think that for me, my experience with, I guess, understanding responsibility has led me to have to push that aside and really support my team in getting through this time. There have absolutely been times where, they've had to raise their hands and say, sorry, I just can't do this anymore, and sometimes, the answer to that is, look, take a week off. I know it's last minute, but if you truly need time, I will step in and I'll help you out. I'll take on your work for the next week or whatever it is, right? And I think that one of the benefits that I've had in a lot of different positions that I've held is when I've had to lead a team, I've always at one point kind of been in roles of other people to where I think that I have a unique level of empathy to understand the challenges that they face, to where, I'm not just a manager or someone one step up in the reporting chain that's telling them what to do. I've been right beside them, throughout a lot of these challenging times. And I found that has been extremely beneficial in, I think, buying patience, buying the trust of people that even though the world is crashing down around us, and I tell them everything's going to be okay, we've got this. I think that's been extremely successful in keeping people motivated and still with me. And I think also, I found that, one of the lessons that I learned early on in managing people is, you know, for me, one of the top, I guess, behaviors that I need to, really represent for my team is that I have their backs. And I think that showing people that even through these challenging times, that someone has your back when you are having times or experiencing times of lack of motivation, burnout, contention and resentment against your company and the challenges that that's creating in your personal life. I think that's been really beneficial.
So how have you taken care of yourself though? And I'm leading us to a place here where I want to tap into something that I believe is true about you, but I want to hit on it in a minute. But how have you taken care of yourself during all this? Because everything you just said is about other people, which is great, and that's what leaders should be thinking about. But leaders also have to take care of themselves. So what have you been doing to do that?
I'd say that, well, one of the weaknesses that I've definitely identified both personally and professionally is that I'm tragically selfless. I am always putting myself as a lower priority over others. And, I think that especially over the past few years, seeing the consequences that has caused me, that has then kind of created issues with others that I prioritize before me. I've kind of discovered that without taking care of myself, then, I can't take care of others. And if I don't take care of myself, the care that I provide for others is not going to be as genuine or as valuable as, if I truly thought about myself a little bit more. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that, I've had to make the sacrifice of, I need to work, I need to get this project done, but, I haven't spent an evening with my wife for the past, 10 days, and what I've had to do in that case is, okay, I'm going to stop at 5 o'clock. I'm going to spend, take my wife out to a nice dinner, and then I'm going to come home and I'm going to work till 4 a.m, and that has, kind of led me to, a challenging place where I just have not been able to really manage the same stress level, the same workload, and I haven't been able to really, I think, capture the same motivation that I used to be able to. So my ability to really keep up with balancing everything has just completely, and I don't want to say it's gotten off the rails or it's spun out of control, but I've definitely seen where consequences of not taking care of myself have appeared in how other people interact with me.
Yeah. So this is going to go to the thing that I believe is true about you since I've known you. And although we've known each other for a while, it's always been just a bit. We've gotten to know each other more over the past while. But something I've always felt was true about you is you're just a genuinely caring person. Like you literally deeply care about the people around you. You're super humble. Like I didn't even know what you did professionally until fairly recently. And it's just you're just that guy that's like so content just to be with people and kind of make things about the group and everyone. You're not seeking that limelight. And by the way, not a negative thing about people who do seek that. It's just who you are. With that comes a lot of caretaking of others, which is great, but a lot of silent suffering.
Totally agree.
So you had mentioned that you have a reduced ability right now to manage. And it's not that the work doesn't get done or anything, but it's just like you're not as snappy as you are. It's kind of like, let's say, a runner who's a great runner, but maybe had to take 2 months off for an injury. They're still a great runner, but they know the difference of when they're running at their peak versus how they're running right now. Yeah. Does that sound right?
Oh, totally. And I'd say that that's absolutely where I feel like I'm at right now.
So can I introduce some thinking about that?
Sure.
So burnout burnout is an interesting thing. So like when people talk about burnout, they usually talk about it in the most like far out way, right?
Yeah.
And like the most extreme version of it. And it's understandable because we're talking about something that, especially due to the pandemic, is much more common. But
Yeah.
really extreme burnout, from my perspective, is relatively rare. Burnout operates just like, again, this is my thinking about burnout. I believe burnout operates in a spectrum, just like most things, where there's mild, moderate, and severe burnout.
Yeah.
I'd say very few professionals experience like severe burnout.
Yeah.
Severe burnout is more of a mental health event.
Yeah.
What it sounds like to me is you're probably experiencing moderate burnout, which is serious. It is totally serious.
Yeah.
And it is experienced by most high functioning, like high level professionals, people who are like all in. They experiencing it probably within every 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Especially when they're at like really stressful periods of their career where they've had to really push and push through things and manage a lot, and there's not really like that pressure relief valve.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right to you?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing around moderate burnout that is kind of like so mild burnout is when the way I try and describe burnout is when I talk about the 3 Ps. So mild burnout is when our patterns of self-care drop. And this is like, self-care, like eating right, sleeping well, like spending time with friends and family, exercising, if you think of those 4 things. When people get mildly burnt out, like they're just like burning the candle at both ends, they're working super hard. Usually your patterns of self-care go out the window.
Yeah.
Right? Like as you were saying, I haven't seen my wife in a while or spent time with my wife in a while. Maybe I'm not exercising, I'm not eating well, I'm not sleeping well, I'm not being social. You're burnt out when that happens.
Yeah.
And it happens when it starts becoming the new normal. Boom, you're mildly burnt out.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean something terrible at all. It just means, you're in a space of mild burnout because your new reality has been taking your patterns of self-care out. If your patterns of self-care remain stable and present, it's very likely that you're not going to fully dip into being burnt out.
Yeah.
When you get into moderate burnout, the P that starts to go there is performance.
Yeah.
And so that's where there's a spike in anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
And it can be anxiety or depression, but anxiety and depression are bedfellows. They tend to work together.
Yeah.
And it just means that our ability to be as engaged with things is reduced because what's taking up a lot of our energy is managing the anxiety and the depression.
Yeah.
Does that sound?
Oh yeah, I would definitely say that I've experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when burnout becomes chronic, and you start to see symptoms of disengagement, not only can you be potentially fighting against, say the self-doubt that you kind of use as fuel to move you along, but, you're also battling the negative reinforcement of doing the work that you do. And that becomes a very quick and very vicious cycle because now what you're doing is as you get engaged, your workload is not going anywhere and you're compounding the problem. And that's a very dangerous place to be in because at that point, not only are there potential mental health consequences and the way that you feel, but, professionally as well, that could, in a way, be a poison pill. You deciding, I don't want to be in this job anymore.
Totally.
I need to move on, and, I've definitely experienced that in certain cases. And, I think for me, one of the, I think catalysts that I've used to kind of avoid some of that was, there was a period of time where I was feeling that level of disengagement. I was content in how I was performing, at least in the fact that even though I wasn't working as much as I used to, the value of the decisions that I was making, the quality of the work that I was contributing was still enough to, at least I think, fulfill, my job duties, even above and beyond what the expectations were. But I mean, really, I started to look for that back door to get out, the escape path, right?
Yeah.
And I ended up applying for a role that, I mean, to be honest, I feel like I would have done amazing at, but my heart wasn't necessarily in it. For me, it was the escape path. It was the grass is going to be greener because I just have so much negative reinforcement with where I'm at today.
Right.
And, I wasn't selected for this role. And I think at the end of the day, it really didn't come down to, whether I was qualified for it. In some ways, I was overqualified for it, but it was a company decision that was made that, I was in a lateral or a higher position. By choosing someone else, that enabled a higher career, higher passive career growth for others. And I think that, in many ways, it would have been more difficult for them to say, fill my role versus this one that was open. And, when I look back on it, part of me also thinks that, really, I find, at least in my own mind, the reason why I didn't get the job was I was not personally invested in actually, going for it 100%. What it actually was is I was personally invested in getting out of my situation that I'm in now, right?
It was escape thinking.
Yeah, exactly. It was escape thinking, right? And, so coming to that realization and harnessing that, I ended up just saying, okay, well, look, I'm desperate to get out of the, the cycle that I'm in. I've taken, I've tried to take an opportunity to get out. It wasn't the right decision at the time, and I can see that now. And so I've really had to kind of channel that energy of looking for something else. And I actually put that back into actually working with my leadership to say, look, I'm not happy in this role, and let me tell you why. And having that extremely, honest conversation about not what tasks were, I guess, harming my perception of the role, but what feelings that I have as an employee. And really what that came down to was I wasn't able to be an effective leader to my team. I think has finally unlocked, maybe some path to improving my condition. And it's interesting because, at that time as well, I mean, I was starting to feel the consequences on my health. And, kind of at the same time, I, finally after years, went to the doctor, and did just a normal checkup. I started taking care of some of the issues that I had. And, I feel like everything has kind of come together at once to prepare me for both personally and professionally to, invest in not necessarily my own professional growth, not necessarily the success of, the people I'm privileged to lead, but, really, I think to improve my own personal situation. And that's both professionally and personally as well. And, I think that does tie back to leadership as well, in the fact that, at the end of the day, you do need to create a positive atmosphere experience for the people that you work with. And, it's almost like I've had to do this for myself. I've had to realize that, I also need to be a leader for my own personal self. And I've been absent in doing that for years,
Dude, thank you so much for sharing that, because you kind of you headed and you took a leap into where I wanted to go with this, is like the selflessness act of leadership it's cool. It's like admirable. I like it. I fall into the same trap, but also it's like vicious.
Yeah.
Right. And it can put us in these weird situations. I also want to say, like, that idea. Well, I'll give you an analogy. So, and this plays into your industry. When you're taking a flight and the flight attendant is like, hey, if the masks come down, don't put your mask on other people, put the mask on yourself. Why do they say that?
I mean, ultimately they say that because without addressing yourself first, you can't be effective in taking care of others. Right. And
so, like, airlines are not like anti-child or anti-like some
exactly.
person who needs help. Yeah. But as a parent, if I was on the flight with my 4-year-old, I know if I heard that, I'd be like, whatever. I'm like, I would nod and be like, yeah, but I'd be like, I'm going to put it on my kid. The reason the reason they say that is you are a more effective community member of the flight if you are awake than you have passed out. And let's say you put the mask on the child, but you pass out, you have become a far bigger burden to that flight, because a child who passes out can be attended to much more easily than a full-grown adult.
Yeah.
If you have to evacuate a plane, anyone can pick up a child.
Yeah.
A passed out adult is an immense weight to carry for people. And I mean, small, big, body size doesn't matter. It's like if anyone's ever tried to carry a fully passed out person, it is extremely difficult. Even someone who's a little cognizant can help you just by how they move their body. A totally passed out person is very difficult to move.
Well, I'm sure too, as a father, you could probably, I guess, see as well that by you putting your daughter's mask on first, if you were to pass out, I'm sure that, let's say something were to happen, and you were to survive or not. I mean, the sense of abandonment that you may feel by helping someone before you help yourself, would be, I think, extremely challenging to live with.
Totally. Well, and also like from a child's perspective, it would probably be a lot more traumatic for a kid passing out until they get a mask on. It would be less traumatic to watching your parent pass out in front of you on a flight.
Yeah.
All of this is to say is like, for leaders, if they don't take care of themselves, they're constantly putting the mask on everyone else.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because you're thinking, well, by helping everyone else, I'm helping the community or helping our company. But actually, you're setting the community up from just a pragmatic space for a much bigger labor.
Yeah.
Because leaders who, in this analogy, pass out, or whose mental health go or physical health go, them not being able to be at their best, or to have to take lots of time off, or to bow out, or to kind of get into escape thinking.
Yeah.
That's way more hazardous for the company and for the community, and in this case, for the flight, right? Yeah. And the idea that I understand why leaders take care of everyone else. I totally get it.
Yeah.
And it seems like the right thing to do, but you have to put your mask on first.
Yeah.
You have to. So it sounds like you finally learned how to put your mask on first professionally.
I'd say that, it's taken me a long time, but I've definitely started to, identify the consequences of not doing so, both professionally and personally. And, just to kind of expand on that a little bit further, I mean, as a leader, oftentimes you become an example to others. And if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not taking any time off, if you are taking on the burden and the stress of situations on behalf of others at all times, that inspires others to do the same thing. And, and it's interesting because that's the opposite of what you're trying to do, right? Totally. And you create this culture of, wanting to seek out, difficulty. Yeah. And, it's an interesting position to be in, where as a leader, that's what you want to try and manage and avoid for the people that you have the privilege to lead. And you may actually be inspiring that behavior. So,
dude, dead on.
Yeah.
So can I tuck into the idea of emotional labor?
Sure.
Okay. So emotional labor, I want to be thoughtful if I talk about it. Like, we live in such a online time where everybody there's just certain terms that they just mean what they mean. Like emotional labor is like some old school psychology. It's been co-opted. It still in many ways means what people think it means. Yeah. But I'll just go down to the most practical psychological meaning of it is, if you have a stimulus, something happens. And whether the stimulus is really, really good or really, really bad, our minds instantly make a judgment call.
Yeah.
And so you've got a stimulus, and you've got the way that you naturally want to react to that. And that the way you want to naturally react on it is based on the complexity of how you were raised, all the situations, what you find threatening, what you find funny, whatever it is. There's a stimulus, you've got your emotional reaction to it. Your mind instantly, so there's the emotion, it's the emotion that you feel. Everyone has different ways of expressing emotion. So you have the emotion that you feel, then you have your way you want to express it. But most human beings, not everyone, but most human beings do a scan instantly. What's the environment I'm in?
Yeah.
So the emotion that I'm feeling, is it appropriate to express it in this environment? So you can think of like a triangle. It's like emotion, expression, environment. So emotional labor is the idea that you experience something, have a stimulus, it brings up an emotion for you, and you look at the environment and realize this environment, it would not be welcoming to me expressing this, or it's inappropriate for me to express it. And so what you do is you either push that emotion all the way down, you just hold it down there, or you push it halfway down and then you get it to a place where you've transformed it into something that works for that environment. So the reason it's been a part of kind of normal, or it's been normalized within culture a lot, is a lot of marginalized people experience high levels of emotional labor because we live in a society that has like such high levels of racism, sexism, that people who from marginalized identities experience high levels of prejudice or interactions that are the stimulus. They raise an emotion, but also because we live in a society that has high levels of racism, sexism, transphobia, all those things, they're not often in it. People aren't often in an environment where they can express that effectively, right? So there's got a high level of emotional labor. It means they're always pushing down tons of emotion.
Yeah.
That's where I think you hear people say often, it's like, I'm exhausted. We'll say, yeah, you're exhausted because you're managing a bunch of stuff that like let's say like a cis white male wouldn't have to experience as much in North America. So that's more of a modern understanding that is true to it. And I think we should honor that. If I boil it down though, and take it to a space of leadership, at best, leaders are experiencing a huge amount of emotional labor at all times.
Totally.
Your business setbacks, like for example, like I have to give this person coaching on something. I have to give them feedback. I know they're going to get super defensive.
Yeah.
Like, oh God, like that's the stimulus. You've got your emotion about it. You're like, I can't react to it. So I got to push that down. So leaders are carrying around tons of emotional labor in general. Throw in the pandemic. Now it's even more.
Yeah.
So can I deepen the analogy for you to talk to you about burnout? So imagine you're holding a dumbbell and you're holding it straight out. All human beings can manage a certain amount of emotional labor.
Yeah.
And just naturally you can do it. And for some people it's like a pound. Other people it's like 5 pounds. Other people can manage tons. They've got like an ultra arm. They can manage tons of emotional labor. But for some point, your arm starts getting tired.
Exactly.
And even if you're not maxed out, if you're managing emotional labor for a long period of time, a high amount, and it's near your max, your arm starts shaking.
Yeah.
Where things get challenging is whether or not people know how to manage their emotional labor or pay their emotional labor. So if you're managing your emotional labor, that's where the self-care stuff that I talked to you about earlier, like, your patterns of self-care.
Yeah.
It's moving a weight from one hand to the other hand.
Yeah.
That arm's getting tired, but this one's resting, then you move it back. If you're good with your self-care, so you have a good diet, you exercise frequently, you spend lots of social time with your friends and family, and you sleep well, you can pass this weight back and forth forever, basically, even if you're under a ton of stress.
Yeah.
But most people, their patterns start to slip, their patterns of self-care start to slip. When that weight starts to go down is when people start going into different stages of burnout.
Yeah.
But there's another idea, and this is something I want to circle back to that I believe is an interesting part for us to talk about. I believe that you can pay off your emotional labor. So it's not like you're perpetually holding this weight that's maxed out. Like the impacts of emotional labor like fade over time. You have good sleep, whatever. But there's always more stresses, like we were talking about, more problems, more things on the horizon. I believe you can pay off huge parts of your emotional labor by engaging in meaningful activities.
Yeah, and I think that this also kind of ties to kind of the overall concept as well about work-life balance, right? And I don't care what anyone says, no one has the perfect recipe or balance for work and life, right? And I've certainly struggled with that. In some ways, work-life balance and the tools that you can use to manage some of that is perfectly translates to the emotional labor concept that you're talking about, right? And, to go a little bit further into the point you made, I think that what it comes down to is not necessarily how you balance that time. It is, are you putting the quality of your own self into that time, right?
That's it.
I mean, to use an example, my wife has Sundays and Wednesdays off work. And, lately I've been very busy, a little bit busier than I normally am. And, I could start to see the signs that, she's just been wanting to spend, some quality time with me. And I took a day off. I mean, I was still kind of looking at my phone every once in a while, answering a few high priority things. But at the end of the day, the quality of the time that we achieved, even though it wasn't a certain amount of time every single day,
Mhm.
the day that we spent together and, the feelings that we both got of reconnecting and making memories
Mhm.
was worth probably 4 months of, being there at dinner on time every day,
Mhm.
and I think that that can apply to your work as well, right? I mean, where you are putting your quality, I think can help you with those types of scenarios, right? I mean,
Dude, yes.
passing the dumbbell, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there may be times where, I mean, you may be shaking a little bit, and sometimes it's not about equally passing it back and forth, but knowing when it's time to actually, move the dumbbell.
Dude, totally. And I
Yeah.
love what you said about quality because, like, when I think of like meaningful stuff, like meaningful results, like, you know, sometimes I said this to someone, they're like, so I should like really like clean out my inbox, my email inbox. I was like, is that meaningful for you? They're like, well, no, it's just like, it's just a ton of work that's sitting on my shoulders. I'm like, but is it meaningful?
Yeah.
They're like, well, no, it's not meaningful for me. I was like, then who cares? Like,
Yeah.
I love what you said about making sure the quality of your time is well spaced. Like a meaningful result to me is something that fills up my cup and equally fills up someone else's cup. Like a meaningful result. So the whole reason I got into doing like triathlons or anything like that is it's a meaningful result. I've
Yeah.
accomplished something. Um, I hate writing records, but I like writing a song.
Yeah.
That's a meaningful result to me. Um, this might sound odd, but like going and hanging out with a friend and helping them move. I don't like carrying furniture, but like doing something for my friend that I know really matters to them,
Yeah.
meaningful result. Meaningful results, I think if you got this arm and even if you're just passing forth, it actually allows you to take some of that weight off and get rid of it.
Yeah.
So the where I'm going with all this stuff, man, is you have been in such a crazy time. And
We all have. So,
we all have,
yeah.
but specific to your career, and you've been managing a lot of stuff and you've been like in the fray. What are you doing to take care of yourself? I asked you earlier and you kind of talked around it, but what are you doing to take care of yourself? What are you doing to pass the dumbbell, the emotional labor dumbbell, so your arms are staying fresh? But also, what are you doing to get those meaningful results? You said one thing, like I'm trying to focus on quality of time where I place it. Anything
Yeah.
else?
I think what it comes down to is, removing excuses, the excuses of this element of my own self-care can wait. If I'm going to embrace the concept of putting, investing in my own personal wellness, or investing, quality time to others, then I need to remove the excuses about doing so. I mean, um, finally, I guess realizing that, I need to make that doctor's appointment. I need to address these things that have had, you know, uh, are small weights that I've been holding on to for some time. That I guess coming to the realization that those weights exist and that even though I've managed them for so many years, that in order to move forward, it's not about at this point getting stronger or passing, the weight, if you will. It is about shedding the weights, and identifying what some of those weights are, and taking those on. I think you lose sight of some of the things that are weighing you down, and it's easy. I don't want to say to become complacent, but put your energy into what is creating the most negative reinforcement at that time, right? I mean, taking care of yourself versus meeting a certain deadline at work. I mean, it's easy to say, yeah, I've got to meet this deadline. I've got to push forward, my career, and the interest of, say, my company, the bigger picture that I'm investing my career into. That takes priority, and in some ways, I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, that maybe unlocks your career. That obviously gets you a paycheck. You do need to put some time into that. But I think seeing the positive impact finally, of actually taking care of yourself, and then seeing how that personal investment translates into the way that I interact with others and the way that I lead others has finally made me realize that self-care isn't exactly selfish, and that it's actually a necessary tool that I need to be able to take care of others the best that I can. And coming to that realization has been very difficult because, again, I've always been very selfless. And I've always kind of, I don't want to say I've bottled it up or anything along those lines, but, and my family, I've always been kind of that, that pillar of stability, if you will, both emotionally and, I guess from a career and a life perspective, I've been fairly stable. Yeah, so again, I think being able to again realize where taking care of yourself is truly taking care of others as well. That's been extremely powerful.
Hell yeah, man. I love to hear it. So in your story, there seems to be a lot of mentorship.
Yeah. I feel like, I didn't realize it early on. I felt like I had people that challenged me, challenged the way that I thought about certain decisions, certain, projects, and how I conducted myself. And what I thought at the time was really a challenge to accomplish a task in a different way. Really looking back, it was a challenge, to develop my own kind of train of thought, if you will, right? A challenge to want to take on more responsibility and apply, say, my decision-making skills to more impactful projects. And I think that, through various steps in my career where I've reported into different organizations, I've had various leaders that have been with me for short periods of time. And I've always tried to really absorb what I think are the most valuable behaviors and skills from a lot of those different leaders. But it wasn't until I actually met someone that demonstrated that they cared more about me than they cared about the job that I did or the outcomes that I achieved. And, establishing that relationship, I think really opened up my eyes to the whole concept of mentorship. I mean, this individual treated me like I was his son, and I love my dad. My dad has been a huge mentor of mine, and we come from two very different worlds professionally. But seeing that someone cares and, cares for you personally more so than professionally, and that all of the, I guess, coaching that they're giving you, while on the surface, it seems like it's in it for your best interest. Really, in reality, they know that you can accomplish professionally what it is that you're tasked with doing. But it's more of they're interested in seeing a continued level of development for you to be able to take those accomplishments to a higher level. And, I think that seeing that also allowed me to kind of tailor my own behaviors with the way that I interacted with my team to be able to kind of accomplish the same thing. I mean, in my early days in managing a team, I was very much a manager and not a leader. I thought leadership at that time was, look, I can do the same job as you. I know the challenges that you face, and I will be there right beside you to do it. And in many ways, I think that kind of undermined some of the people that I was working with, because it kind of appeared as though, well, this guy just trying to work me out of a job, I mean, but I think learning that you can work side by side with people, help them through, difficult tasks and, really inspiring people that they have everything it takes to overcome very complex, challenges. Um, just supporting them to help them get over that hill, if you will, I think is, you know, seeing some successes in that realm has, I think, enabled me to identify that I have been a mentor to others without being aware of it whatsoever. Understanding that people have looked up to me the same way I looked up to my mentors has really changed the way that I've carried myself and the way that I've interacted with others. And so,
hell yeah, man. So I know something that you've been using that we kind of, I don't want to say you've closed a musical chapter in your life, but you're not playing music anymore. But most people need some kind of creative outlet. Totally. And you found one that's super cool. So what can you tell us about your photography?
So, as I started to channel more of my energy into my career versus, say, my own personal interests like music, there was a great sense of internal frustration that I felt over time that, I feel in, creative outlets like music or art, there's a certain level of self-expression that is not necessarily a language, right? I mean, in music, there's an energy that comes with it, right? There's something that has your own personal signature that's like a part of you that you're able to really get out. And not having that for a period of time was, it became very frustrating, I mean, when I don't want to draw a parallel to The Shining, but I mean, all work and no play does make Jack a dull boy. And I mean, I really did feel after a period of time, like I lost a certain sense of my own personal identity because, while I was achieving a lot of great things in my career, I mean, that's not what I was born to do. I mean, that did not have my own personal signature to it. And so, I was in a time in my life where I didn't really have the opportunity to be in a band. I still wanted to find a creative outlet and had always been interested in photography. And as I started to get a little bit more into it and taking it seriously, and as I started to get exposed to more professional photographers and artists, I started to really kind of understand how I could express myself through picture versus music or, my own personal career accomplishments. And, that was an extremely valuable, I think self-realization and discovery that I could express myself through other creative means than just music. And so, while I have started to kind of play electric drums, nowadays I'm starting to kind of get back into revisiting a lot of the music that, I've kind of lost touch with over the past maybe 5 to 10 years. I still now try and carve out a fair amount of time into ensuring that I always have that creative outlet through photography. And, very early on, as I started to shoot more seriously, I won a photo contest through a filmmaker. I think that gave me a little confidence that my vision was maybe, translating with others well. That the vision that I had, was appreciated by others, and I think having that, validation, allowed me to put more effort into it because I'm sure you've experienced it as well, in your music career and what you do in music, that self-doubt sometimes keeps you from wanting to push forward. So,
dude, totally. And when we were talking about meaningful results, that to me is a meaningful result. Like you're basically a self-taught photographer, correct?
Totally. Yeah.
So the exact same way you did your career. You're like,
exactly.
You went in, you learned the basics, you kind of identified your own process, filled in your gaps, kept going forward. You've been recognized for it by winning this prize. People care about your photography.
Yeah.
And would you mind if I dip in on this for
Sure,
a sec?
Absolutely.
Like one of the things I just encourage people, like, I think we all had a good hard look at ourselves during this pandemic.
Yeah.
And this one thing I encourage people to do is like, life doesn't happen tomorrow or the day after the day after. Life's happening right now. As I'm speaking, I'm losing a life. Or you could think I'm gaining something, right? And I just really encourage people, like, if I'm stepping back, I went through like a really, really tough time in around 2016 for a couple of years. And I really, really held up a mirror to myself and like deep, really struggling heavily. And it's the first time I ever really thought about death. And like, you have this idea like you live forever, even though you don't. You live like you do, right? And that means you waste time, you do stupid shit, you like get into weird beefs with people, you work too hard, whatever it is. But we all die. And if anything, death should be this great reminder of life and how like death is actually a good thing because it reminds you to live and to have meaningful results. And so to be able to pay off your emotional labor, you've got to do things that are meaningful to you. And sometimes that means you got to go find something that's meaningful to you, like you did with photography. I love that. Anything you want to add to that before we keep going?
No, I think we're good, man.
All right, cool. All right. So as we're closing off, I'm going to ask you 3 questions and they're going to scale up hard, man. They're going to get way harder. So in our pre-interview, you dropped something that I loved to Spencer. Why is experience far more valuable than education?
Well, I come from an interesting background in the fact that I don't have very much of a formal education at all. But what I have come to learn from others that, have multiple master's degrees that, have, in a sense, have worked for me is, I think one of the things that you gain from experience that you don't gain from, say, a textbook college education is some of the nuances of the realities that come with the working world, the consequences of, that you may face if you don't succeed, and the nuances of the pressures that come along with making a decision, and in school, you're given a task and, you may have enough time until, say, your deadline for your exam or whatever to try and work through a complex problem. But without the monetary consequences of a risk that you're looking to overcome or a business decision that you're looking to invest in, without the pressures coming down from, say, executives or, customers that you're negotiating with, I think that not having that exposure or gaining that exposure in experience versus education is extremely valuable. So I guess that's kind of top level where I think experience is more valuable. And I also feel like I've seen that as well in my career that, I've always felt a little sense of inadequacy in a lot of my, career moves, and the fact that I knew I was up against people that had, very extensive and successful academic careers, and, I didn't. And at the end of the day, though, having the exposure to various decision-making, opportunities and gaining the experience and really kind of, I think, learning from some of the best practices of others through my work experiences, I find that has been more valuable, not only for myself, but valuable in a lot of other people that I think work at a very high level with very limited education.
Yeah. Can I offer something to frame it up?
Sure.
I firmly believe that experience forms you while education informs you.
Yeah.
And I love being informed. Hell yeah, I love being informed. But when you have to go out and do it and figure it out, it forms you in a certain way.
Yeah.
And someone there might know more about it than you, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be able to be the person who can lead that over the line.
Yeah.
Being informed matters, but being well formed as a leader, I believe, is like way more important. And you get through it through experience.
I'll give you an example of where I feel like I totally agree with what you're saying. And I'll kind of give you one of my first experiences kind of in that realm of being, I guess experience versus informed is this was in my first job working as an aircraft mechanic. I worked at a cargo company where we had small aircraft go out to all these remote airports. And oftentimes, if they broke out, they would fly you out on the next cargo flight, and then you would have to fly home in that aircraft. So I was working in Oakland at the time. I flew out to Sacramento, and the pilot dropped me off and basically said, okay, so you're flying home on this aircraft. So you're going to take responsibility for whatever you find here. And, being faced with making a decision of, hey, there's a problem with this aircraft and that is truly compromising the airworthiness of it. And being, I guess, confronted with, having to make a decision that, okay, I obviously have gone to school to get this education to do what I'm about to do. I have some experience to be able to do it. But having the gravity of, if I don't get this right, I could find myself in a very, severe situation where, the issue that I was dealing with was the pilot reported that there was an engine fire. Uh-huh. And so, the idea of I'm either successfully making a decision or I'm going to be flying home on an aircraft that could catch on fire. And that experience and understanding, I think the direct impact and the gravity of what I do was, very essential to shaping the way that I have kind of proceeded in my career, understanding, I think, really the gravity of the decisions that you make and the consequences, that was an experience that for me, I think shaped the way that I perform my job thereafter, because I had to really put myself in the position of, if I'm going to work on this airplane, I need to be willing to fly in it every single time that I work on it, and have assurance that it is safe for my pilots as if I was flying right seat. So,
hell yeah, man. That's super powerful. All right. Second last question. Okay. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
If you were thinking about leaders who are coming up, who are someone like you, who's just like a good, kind person and is really about taking care of other people, what's some advice that you could give someone who's coming up as a leader who is selfless, but maybe selfless to a dangerous point?
I'd say that don't undermine the importance of self-awareness. I think leaders often are pretty self-aware. I think having the capability to lead, forces you in a position where you do need to be very mindful of the way that you behave, act in front of others, and what you do and what you say. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes I think that focus is projected more on external actions, right? And so from what I've learned is that is important, but you can't forget on projecting that focus inwards as well, because, as we've talked about through my experiences, you can't take care of others unless you take care of yourself.
Hell yeah. All right. Hardest question I'm going to ask you, man.
Okay.
Top 3 of all time greatest California hardcore bands. Just hardcore in general. You define what hardcore is. You can call any band hardcore. I'm not going to argue. Now, let me just tell you this. People are listening, so choose wisely.
Wow. That is a difficult question. And I mean, yeah, there's no right answer here. But
there's many wrong answers.
Yeah. Top 3 California hardcore bands. Okay. I feel your eyes searing in on me right now, man. The whole world is, for me, I'd say that one of the most influential in my life is Instead.
Mm-hmm.
Chain of Strength. Mm-hmm. And for me, at a very, I think, formidable time in my life, a band that I was very passionate about was Never Healed. Mm-hmm. And that's just my own personal preference. Mm-hmm. I don't think that any of those are really to stack up against musical merit or, the accomplishments, but more so what those bands mean to me. Those are my top three.
Well, first of all, Never Healed is sick. Shout out to Casey. I love
totally.
that
Absolutely.
That's awesome. That's great. Dude, listen, this is a great conversation. Before we close off, where can people find you? Where can they hear about what you do? Where can they learn about you, and anything else that you want to pump up or promote?
I mean, professionally, you can find me on LinkedIn. Personally, I put a lot of my own personal passions into my photography. So you can find me at Can We Call This Life? Now you can find me on this podcast.
Drew, this was an incredible conversation. Like when I asked you to come on, you seemed a bit reticent, like, oh, I don't know if I got something to add. This was an incredible conversation.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. And I'm glad that, we had this time to really, I think, share our experiences because, one thing that, I guess kind of tying back to our conversation is oftentimes I haven't been aware of how my experiences can be valuable to others. And, seeing that now, I certainly look back and wish that, I had that sense of, access to folks in my position now to kind of help me through, I think, especially some challenging time in my early 20s, where I was having to define a career and make a decision on, what I was going to do for the rest of my life. So, but yeah.
Heck yeah, man. Well, listen, everyone, I'm going to see you in the outro. Drew, you're the best, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's do that triathlon.
Okay.
All right. Everyone, I'll see you in the outro. And Spencer, drop the beat.
One.